Hello everyone and welcome to this talk, Standing Out from the Crowd, How and Why Gi Effektivt Changed Our Brand, by Managing Director of Gi Effektivt, Kari Kjørholt. Kari will take some questions after this talk, and the way you submit questions is via the Swapcard app. So you go into the app, and then you go to the event, and then in the event you join the live discussion, and there you can ask questions. You can also upvote other questions, so you can kind of bump up the questions you like more up in the queue. Kari Kjørholt is materials engineer studied at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. She just quit her engineering job to become the managing director of Gi Effektivt. Give her a warm hand.
Hi everyone, really good to see you here. And thank you Maria for the introduction. So as Maria just said, I am the brand new managing director of Gi Effektivt as of about 3 months ago. I first came into the EA movement back in 2020 through the student group at NTNU and decided last year that I would go full-time into Gi Effektivt. Gi Effektivt fundraises for GiveWell recommended charities in Norway and was started back in 2015 by the student group at NTNU. But last year we went through quite a drastic brand change. And why did we decide to do this extensive rebranding? What were we thinking, what were the results, and what are we planning on doing forward? To answer these questions, I'll first start by giving you the quick version of the Gi Effektivt origin story. So, Gi Effektivt was started by the EA NTNU group back in 2015. They had seen barriers of promoting and donating to GiveWell's recommended charities, and they wanted to reduce those. So an early incentive was getting tax deductions. What if they could create this organization that would be eligible for tax deductions and then all donate through that? So after a lot of volunteer hours that spring and summer, they were able to establish the Effect Foundation in December of 2015. And in the following years, it seemed to be promising, and the donations grew into the millions of Norwegian kroners. Late 2020 and early 2021 was a bit of a turning point for the organization. So they'd seen good results, and there was also signals that they could get funding for scaling up. So it seemed like a good opportunity to be more ambitious. And to reach a new and more ambitious goal, they needed to professionalize. So 2 employees were hired. And they also put up a new strategy, which said that we would try to aim for 100 million Norwegian kroners every single year for GiveWell recommended charities, and we would do that by 2025. This is the old website, a version of it at least, and the old logo right here. And over the years, the volunteers had put down a lot of good effort, but of course their time was limited. And a lot of temporary solutions had become permanent, and there wasn't really a well thought through communications plan. It was built on standard elements, and a lot of the elements of text and pictures and other visual information was not coherent and made the messaging a bit messy. Oh, sorry. The hierarchy of information was also not great, so where you could find what, and the general user experience was not perfect. We were communicating like a traditional aid organization, but we weren't really one. And it had been kind of a conscious decision because it seems appropriate to be a bit conservative and careful when you're going to a new field where you don't really have any full-time employees that can think clearly about brand and communication. But this upscaling and professionalizing with more capacity in the organization seemed like a good opportunity to do so. Some thought it was a risky decision because we already had a somewhat established brand. But if we were to scale up to 100 million by 2025, only about 10% of our users by then would have seen our original brand. And another aspect of this is that it could provide the broader EA community and fundraising community with some information about how good of an idea it is to do such a rebranding. So we started the process of developing a standout brand. And we wanted something that was recognizable and professional. We wanted to be trustworthy enough that it was clear to you what you could do, but you didn't really have to go into the details unless you really wanted to. So we started asking questions. Who were we? What did we have to offer? And what really made us stand out from the crowd? These questions were discussed at length with stakeholders, and they were developed into a brand platform. And this brand platform contained this information. So our mission, reason to exist, basic idea, personality, values, market position, the desired impression we wanted to have on our donors, and a few slogans. It was then, this brand platform was used to create a more detailed design brief that we took to design agencies. And we used that to figure out who we want to cooperate with, so who understood what we were trying to do. A lot of the big design agencies were interested, but we ended up with someone called Bjelke & Young because we also saw some previous projects with them that we liked. We found that even though we had been communicating like a traditional aid organization, we were really more a service. And together with them, we started especially working on our position. So if we are a service, we should start to communicate like one. It's not that you do us a favor by giving us your money. We have something to offer you. We can give you advice on how to do the most good for your donations, completely free of charge. So, to have a look at what we needed to stand out from, here are some examples on how traditional aid organizations communicate. First of all, they tend to use quite a lot of pictures, and often pictures of kids and people in need. And they play on emotion quite a bit. A lot of the websites also have a lot of color and are quite full of information, sometimes a bit messy. We wanted to be more like a service and looked to some modern services to figure out what we could do. So this is a company that does insurance, and the design is very clear, minimalistic, and it's easy to figure out what they do. Here's another example, accounting service, very minimalistic, and you understand right away what they offer you. So, what did we actually get from this rebranding process? I already mentioned the brand platform, and that's a tool that I still use almost on a daily basis to figure out details of our communication. We were also supposed to get a new name because we wanted something that could intrigue the users more and didn't just plainly state what we were doing. And we had actually even landed on something, but quite last minute, we found that there was an organization with a very similar name to the one that we had newly decided on that was going to establish themselves in Norway. And we just saw that we needed to keep Gi Effektivt. So even though we didn't get a new name, we still defined a very specific way of writing the name. So there had been a ton of different versions before. And that also led us to the new logo. The design agency, they helped us with our new profile, meaning they gave us a brand guide, and the brand guide states, for example, how our logo can be used, what type of white space we should have on the page, how we should use pictures and other graphical elements together, and the flow of the page, more or less. And all this was gathered into the new website that they also helped us with. In addition, we also made some merch, which was hoodies that became quite popular with our supporters after that. In the time leading up to this rebranding, we were careful to consider to communicate with our stakeholders, meaning the board, our volunteers, and the effective altruism community in Norway in general. So we wanted people to be on board with what we were trying to do and be excited about it. One very specific thing that seems quite simple but is harder than you think is to get people to write the name in the way that we want it. Of course, after rewriting a lot of the text on the website, programming the whole new website, we changed everything overnight, so before one Friday in June of last year. And that meant, of course, totally revamping our website, but it also meant all social media profiles and other places where our brand was visible. And then that same day, we had a big launch party with our stakeholders, like volunteers and supporters, to enforce this excitement even more and make them proud of what they were part of. So, I'll show you a bit what the brand actually looks like. It's simply just black and white. So we wanted this to play on our rational side. There is no fuss, it's straight to the point. And even the logos of our recommended charities got this black and white revamp to fit into our website. We don't use many pictures at all on our website, but we still want to have an interesting visual experience. And one thing that fits extremely well with our brand is graphs. So here are some graph styles that have been quite recently developed, but is building on the work that the design agency did. And our core target group is typically young, highly educated people with an engineering or economics background that value rationality and a scientific approach. And we think that things like this especially speak to them. And an inspiration here is, for example, Our World in Data, which uses statistics and data to tell a story. And that's something we want to do as well. We also have a separate font, which we can also use to have interesting typographical elements. So we are simple, but we can make it interesting by small nudges. This is a picture of our front page. So here you can see it all put together, though you don't see the details. With regards to text, we have quite clear directions as well as to what we want to do. There's some different categories. The content that first greets the user should be short, to the point, and easily understandable. But we also have more in-depth content, and there we still want to be to the point and avoid salesy language, but we can have longer, more nuanced arguments. And some pages are just about explaining content to the user, and we simply put the user experience in focus. One thing we do to mimic scientific literature is to use footnotes in our articles. And we think that this gives the impression, and of course it's true as well, that we think it's important to be thorough and that we are trustworthy. So people don't really have to read this, even though they can. The last thing I want to show you is this personal donations page. This came a bit after the rebranding, but not long after. So here donors can log in and they can see all their historic donations. They can see the impact of their donations, and they can administer a lot of their data, for example, their recurring donation agreements. And they can also sign up for the newsletter and a couple other things. It has been a very popular feature. So we had a goal of having about 10% of our recurring donors sign in the first year. But actually within the first 6 months, more than half of recurring donors had signed in. So this is something that will probably continue to develop even more. So we have gotten a new brand that we think speaks well to our rational sides. And we're very happy with it. But some people still think it's a bit hard and minimalistic, and we do realize that aspect as well. So there are some things that we still want to develop. For example, we are working on an illustration style for the website to make it more interesting. Not using pictures, but still creating this visual experience. We still have to implement all of the graph style. There's some new features for articles. And then there's a bunch of things that are not related to the website directly, but for example, refining our newsletter, our emails, getting that fully into brand. We want to do more social media posts that have cool designs. And this presentation is also the first time we're using the new presentation templates. So, to conclude, we got this brand new look, and we're quite happy how it turned out. However, it's still a bit early to conclude exactly on how successful it is, but we think that this has what we need to be able to reach the 100 million Norwegian kroners that we want to do by 2025.
Thank you, Kari. We have some questions from the audience. Let me just see. You can still submit those through Swapcard if you want to. The first one is, why didn't you brand yourself as GiveWell Norway? Do you plan to promote recommendations from other evaluators or cause areas?
So we are still partly a foundation, and first of all, we think there's some advantages of not being simply GiveWell. We don't do the actual research, so it would have been kind of stealing their brands, and we shouldn't claim to be experts in a way that we aren't. There's also some flexibility in having other options. In the foundational documents of the foundation says that we can give recommendations of GiveWell charities and giving what we can recommended charities. And that's something we've moved more towards, especially with major donors. And that's basically a continuous approach. Giving what we can has, for a few years now, not given that many separate recommendations, but are moving back into it. So something we're considering.
Yeah. Next question is, I know you ended up not changing your name, but I'm curious to know what process was for brainstorming and selecting a new name. It's hard.
Yeah, so I actually wasn't really involved in this process. I was involved in a lot of the text production with the rebranding, but I know that Jørgen and Eirik that were involved had several brainstorming processes with the design agency, and the name that they ended up with was Conduit, which means something like leading the way or like funneling. Yeah, they wanted something that describes what we do, but not in a so direct way.
Yeah. Thank you. Are you planning on making the concept multilingual? Language, is that what it's called? Yeah.
Yeah.
And suitable for use in other countries?
Yeah. We have sister organizations all around Europe, but right now we're actually doing a project with Gi Effektivt here in Sweden. So they are getting our backend solution, our front end solution, and also our design. We started that work about 2 weeks ago. So we've also asked if we should do English, for example, but we think that most of the value is in the native languages, as there's already a lot of information available in English from GiveWell and Giving What We Can.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have any competitors in Norway?
Not directly. We there are other organizations that aim to help people or give advice to people about where to donate. There's one called Innsamlingskontrollen, but they more do a background check on different organizations, and it's quite standard, so they're not so result focused. I guess our biggest competitors would be the traditional aid organizations. Yeah.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Yeah. Okay, I'll come down with a microphone. You were writing it.
Yeah.
But then you need a microphone. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to ask is like how if you see the possibility of doing like how our world in data is doing, where they kind of pull real-time data, and you can like connect it to some APIs and see how things are going in real time. And another thing that I wanted to point out is that when I saw the dashboard where you could see how your donations are affecting other people, it kind of looking at it as with how do you say, with the static numbers, raised a little bit of my skeptical self. And given that this is for scientific, your target group, it's people that cares about epistemology and stuff like that, maybe adding some sort of confident values, like you have help between 20 and 30 people, may work better than just giving static numbers.
Yeah, interesting comment. I can say a bit about the background for these numbers. So we have this impact API, and what that does is basically we put in GiveWell's latest estimates for a given organization, and then of course they have some uncertainty, but they also give a certain estimated cost effectiveness, and that's where that number comes from. Giving a range could be useful, but it could also be confusing to some people. We do reach out to people that are interested in these things, but it's definitely quite a lot broader than the EA community itself. So many of our users are maybe not that concerned with it. But one thing we hope to do this year is to do user interviews to figure out how people react to these things, basically. Did I answer your first question? Yeah, so I'm not sure how accessible that data is. I know that Against Malaria Foundation, they have this one thing they do where you can connect your specific donation to a grant that they make. So you can follow each bednet and say, okay, this is being produced right now, this is being transported, or this has been delivered to a household. And that's something that we have looked into as well. It's just matter of like figuring out exactly how to do it and if it's worth the amount of work it turns out to be.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kari. Here is your chocolate for your
you.
talk. If you want to hear more about the journey of Gi Effektivt, Kari is having another talk at 3 this afternoon. It's called Gi Effektivt, from student project to 100 million Norwegian kroners yearly to effective charities. She'll also have office hours after that talk at 3:30 in the discussion space. Give Kari a warm applause.